Has anyone ever had sleep paralysis before? It's one of the strangest, most fascinating yet horrifying things you could experience. You wake up, but your body refuses to move. You try to scream, but nothing comes out. And then, you see it, lurking in the shadows, watching you. Tonight, we dive into 5 terrifying stories of sleep paralysis that will make you dread falling asleep. Daniel was in college, going through one of the most stressful weeks of his life. It was finals week, and he hadn't been sleeping well. That night, he passed out late, exhausted. The next thing he knew, he was awake, but he couldn't move. At first, he thought it was a dream, but then he saw something standing at the foot of his bed. A tall, shadowy figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. His heartbeat pounded as the figure started to glide. Yes, glide, closer to him. It leaned down until its hollow eyes were inches from his face. And then, in a voice that wasn't human, it whispered something. Something Daniel couldn't understand. Just when he thought he would die right then and there, he gasped and broke free from the paralysis. The figure was gone. But from that night on, whenever he experienced sleep paralysis, the man in the hat was always there, watching, waiting. And each time he got closer. One night, he swore he saw its face, a grotesque, hollowed-out void where its eyes should have been. And then it spoke again. Not yet. Maya had her first sleep paralysis experience in her college dorm. At first, she thought it was just stress. But one night, everything changed. She woke up, unable to move, but she wasn't alone. In the dim light, she saw something crouching in the corner. Its limbs were bent at unnatural angles, its fingers twitching erratically, as if it was learning how to move. And its face. Oh God. Its face. The thing had a wide, forced smile. Too wide, stretching unnaturally from ear to ear, as if it were trying to mimic a human expression but failing in the most grotesque way. Maya wanted to scream, to run, but her body betrayed her. The thing tilted its head, its hollow eyes locking onto her as its body began shifting, jerking with unnatural movements. Then, it started crawling toward her. Slow at first, its limbs bending the wrong way, the bones inside cracking loudly with each movement. Then faster, closer. It dragged itself across the floor like a marionette with cut strings, its grotesque smile never fading. Maya's chest grew heavy, as if unseen hands were pressing her down into the mattress. The thing reached the foot of her bed and stopped. Its mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. A black, tar-like substance dripped from its lips, hitting the sheets with a sickening splatter. A foul stench filled the air, the smell of rotting flesh and something else, something ancient, something wrong. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, willing it to disappear. But she felt it. The bed dipped under its weight. A hot, rancid breath washed over her face. Then it spoke. A voice that wasn't a voice, but a guttural distortion, layered and inhuman. I found you. The pressure on her chest intensified, her lungs burning as she struggled to breathe. Just when she thought she would pass out, the weight lifted. Silence. Cautiously, she opened her eyes. It was gone. But the stench lingered. And then, the scratching started. A slow, deliberate scrape against the wood of her dorm room door. She wasn't sure what was worse, that it had left, or that it was still there. Waiting. Jason had experienced sleep paralysis before, but nothing like this. One night, he woke up, paralyzed, but instead of seeing something in his room, he heard something. A faint scratching sound coming from under his bed. It started slow, a rhythmic, deliberate drag. Then it grew frantic, like nails raking against the wooden floor. His breath hitched as the sound got closer. Then it stopped. Then he felt it. A cold, clammy hand wrapped around his ankle, fingers impossibly long and thin, pressing into his skin with inhuman strength. His body stiffened in sheer terror as the grip tightened, pulling. Harder, stronger. His legs felt heavier, like he was sinking into the mattress. His sheets twisted around him like restraints, and he realized whatever was under his bed wanted him down there with it. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. His vision blurred as his body trembled against the force dragging him downward. The wooden frame of the bed groaned, the mattress creaking under unseen pressure. He felt his calf begin to slip beneath the bed frame into the unknown darkness below. Just as his mind teetered on the edge of madness, he snapped awake. The room was still. The grip was gone. But when he hesitantly looked under his bed, the air turned ice cold. There, in the darkness beneath, two gleaming, inhuman eyes stared back at him. And then, it whispered his name. Jenna had suffered from sleep paralysis for years, but it was always the same. Dark figures in her room, a pressure on her chest, the overwhelming sense that something was watching. But one night, something changed. The whispers started. The words were garbled at first, a sickening blend of hisses and static. But then, they became clear. Jenna, let me in. The voice slithered through the air, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was something else, something ancient, something hungry. The closet door groaned as it inched open, on its own. A mass of darkness shifted inside, its limbs moving like tangled marionette strings. It grew taller, stretching toward the ceiling, its mouth splitting into a twisted, jagged grin. Jenna tried to close her eyes, to block out the horror, but her lids wouldn't shut. She could only watch as the figure stepped out, its elongated fingers twitching as it dragged itself toward her. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with decay. The shadow loomed over her, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. A long, skeletal hand reached forward, fingers wrapping around her throat. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was its mouth, stretching open, revealing an endless abyss of writhing, whispering faces. And then, the world went black. Ethan had never experienced sleep paralysis before, but on one particular night, he woke up, completely frozen in his bed. At first, he thought he had simply woken up too suddenly, his body still sluggish from sleep. Then he noticed something. His bedroom mirror wasn't reflecting the room correctly. Everything in the reflection seemed slightly off. His bed was there, his desk, his chair. But there was something else, a figure. It stood in the reflection just beyond the frame. He couldn't move his head to look at the actual room, only the mirror. The figure took a step closer, then another, and then it smiled. Ethan wanted to scream, to turn away, but his body refused. The figure raised its hand and touched the inside of the mirror. A greasy, smudged handprint appeared on the glass. Then, with a sickening crack, the figure's head tilted unnaturally to the side. Its eyes, his eyes, were hollow, dark voids. It lifted its hand again and knocked, once, twice. The sound echoed inside Ethan's skull, each tap growing louder. Then, the glass fractured. A thin web of cracks spread outward, and Ethan felt something shift in the air, as if the space between the reflection and reality had grown thinner. The figure leaned forward, pressing its broken face against the splintering surface. "Let me out," it whispered, its voice an exact replica of Ethan's own. And then, Ethan woke up. Or at least he thought he did. But when he looked towards the mirror, the cracks were still there, and something on the other side was still moving, watching, waiting. Liam never believed in the supernatural. Sleep paralysis, he told himself, was just a trick of the brain, a nightmare bleeding into waking life. But what happened that night wasn't a trick. It wasn't a nightmare. It was something else. He woke up, frozen, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Not even the usual hum of his heater. Just silence. And then, he heard it. A voice. No, not one voice. Many. Whispers layered over each other, coming from somewhere in the room. He couldn't make out the words at first. Just a low, urgent murmur, rising and falling, shifting from one side of the room to the other. The voices weren't speaking to him. They were speaking about him. He strained to listen, his body rigid with terror. Then, just as the whispers turned clear enough to understand, they stopped. A thick, heavy silence filled the air. His pulse thundered in his ears, his breath shallow. Then, just when he thought it was over, something repeated what the whispers had said. The voice was right next to him, too close. A wave of cold air brushed against his ear. Liam's body screamed for him to move, to run, but he was trapped. His eyes darted frantically around the room until they landed on his closet door. It was open, just an inch, but he was certain, absolutely certain, he had closed it before going to bed. The air grew heavy, pressing down on him like a crushing weight. Then, from inside the closet, something stepped out. It wasn't a person. It was taller, thinner, limbs stretching too long, fingers dragging against the floor as it moved. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, its face hidden in the shadows. But Liam could feel its gaze drilling into him, watching, studying. Then, in one sickening, jerky motion, it snapped its head upright. Liam's breath hitched as the thing crawled onto his bed, its limbs folding unnaturally as it crept closer. He could hear its breathing now, ragged, hungry. A single bony finger pressed against his chest, cold and sharp as a knife. The voices from before returned, whispering, chanting. His vision blurred, his heartbeat slowed. The room around him darkened as if something was pulling him under. Just as his mind teetered on the edge of unconsciousness, the thing leaned in close, its mouth wide and gaping, nearly touching his ear. And then, it spoke. The weight vanished. Liam gasped, jerking upright. His room was empty. The closet door was shut, but the whispers still echoed inside his head. And in the silence, he realized something even worse. He could still feel the pressure of that cold, bony finger right over his heart,